Welcome everybody to the meeting of the Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel. Just to begin with, we'll do some introductions and give some apologies. So if we could start off with yourself, Councillor Armour.
Yes, thank you, Mr Chairman. Councillor Bill Armour, Kurt Burton Ward, and a partial apology, I will have to leave early.
Councillor Harpreet Upper Ashbrow Ward.
Richard Murgatroyd Golka Ward.
Councillor Judith Hughes, Almonbury Ward.
Mark Mercer, retired small businessman. That's the business that's small, not me.
Okay, and if I could welcome to the meeting two of our council officers who are going to be presenting the item later on looking at Kirklees' economic strategy. We've got Alan Seisman and Kate McNicholas, who are going to be talking us through the Kirklees economic strategy and answering questions. I'd also like to welcome Andrew Bird, who is here as an observer with a view to becoming a potential co-optee. Right, thank you. In terms of apologies, we've got one apology from Councillor Martin Bolt. And I think Councillor Armour has already indicated that he will need to leave before the end of the meeting. First item then, looking at the minutes of the previous meeting. Don't know if you want another minute or so, just have a quick look at them, but if people could indicate whether or not they're happy with approving those. Okay, yeah. Right, in terms of items of matters arising, I've got one or two things, but are there any things that you'd like to raise? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the third paragraph under minutes of the previous meeting, I think they were going to give us some further information, profile of homeless and rough sleepers, details of the impact of universal credit. Has that been received?
Okay, the information about rough sleepers, the Rough Sleepers Initiative, just to remind people, this is where a group of community organisations have come together to come up with some common guidelines about how they're approaching homelessness and rough sleepers to fit in with the work of the council. The work has been undertaken. There has been a first draft of it produced, and it is planned that that is actually going to be sent out to all councillors, and there is going to be communication from the team led by Kath McGurk, who has come along a couple of times to speak to us. So that should be happening shortly. Yeah, so it's just the final stages of looking through that. The domestic violence issue, if you remember, that arose from some of the discussions around housing. And at the overview and scrutiny management meeting on Monday, we had a look at the new Kirklees domestic abuse strategy, so the draft of that. And I raised at that meeting that here we had brought up the fact that we wanted to know more about this. And I think the key point was we felt it was really important that this was communicated to all councillors, and councillors should be aware of who to contact if they came across issues of this type in their ward work. So that was kind of communicated back, and it was agreed at the meeting that this strategy is going to be communicated widely, and those specific details that people want in terms of knowing who to contact, that will feature very heavily in the information that goes out. Yeah, I think that the other work that's kind of flowing from previous meetings, we said that Councillor Armour and Councillor Hughes, they volunteered to work with officers from housing to look at the open age policy and local lettings. And I gather you've had some discussions about setting those meetings up, so that's in train. I don't think you've met yet, have you, about it? But 1st of October, yeah. Although in the previous year, Councillor Hughes and myself did have a very lengthy meeting with housing officers and the cabinet member involved. So it is picking up on some work that's happened previously. We also looked at the Hackett report, which is the report into fire safety issues following on from the Grenville Tower strategy. There's been quite a bit of discussion about that, and I think what's going to happen is over the next few weeks we need to have some further discussion about exactly how that's going to take place. I think the view is that it shouldn't just involve people from within the council. We should look at other bodies who've got particular expertise and interest in fire safety in coming together for a review of what's happening and presenting that in public. So people will be aware of the work that's happening within Kirklees, both inside the council and outside the council. My one note of relative failure is reporting back on what's happening with the review of buses and bus routes. There's been some brief discussion about that, but I will try and endeavour to get some kind of written report on that ready for the next meeting. I think the view was we didn't want to get into a very long discussion about this again, because we'd spent ages on various transport issues last time, but people were interested in what was happening with that. Right. Anything else to do with minutes? Yeah. Right. With the universal credit, as I think we said at the previous meeting, one of the problems is that that was part of the agenda of the work of the Tackling Poverty group. What I have done is to raise that as an issue in terms of who is going to pick that up going forward, because it did come up in relation to the domestic abuse strategy. Because one thing that has been picked up, I think, is that there does seem to be some relationship between the introduction of universal credit and possibly the incidence of domestic violence, and one or two other changes that are happening do seem to be having some effect on domestic violence. There is a very strong correlation between poverty and certainly the reported instances of domestic abuse. Yeah. So that is, again, something that we'll need to return to. But I think that's something that shouldn't just come to a body like this. It's something that we probably need to look at cabinet level or indeed across the whole council. Yeah, but that's okay. Right, anything else? Yeah.
Yes, if you could just enlighten me on resolved item 2. I don't know what the open age policy is. I mean, I suppose everybody else does, but can you just enlighten me on that and whether anything is happening about that in the local letting framework?
Yeah, that's, sorry to make that clear, but that's the work of Councillor Armour and Councillor Hughes. So it's about the policies with regards to how available properties, K&H properties in the main, are allocated to the people who are on the housing list. So that the age part of it relates to the fact that rather than certain properties being allocated just for people, say elderly people, there was a shift to them being available on a more open basis so that people of different ages could apply for those properties. So it's a review of how that has actually worked and whether or not that is a good idea. It's also looking at things on a kind of local level about how houses are allocated. I don't know. You want to say anything more about that?
So who are they reporting to?
I would imagine that this is something that would probably go to Cabinet as well in terms, yeah, because it's going to be quite a major change. Am I correct in that would go probably to Cabinet? Yeah. So it may well come to us again before it goes to Cabinet for a decision and it's adopted as a policy.
I'd just like to ask a question about the paragraph on page 4. Councillor May that outline the initiatives of the council that are introduced to minimise waste. It goes on to say introducing recyclable recyclable tea and coffee cups and working with local manufacturers and retailers on increasing single-use plastics. Now, they don't want to be increasing the use of plastics, do they? I mean, does it read correctly? Am I misunderstanding it?
No, I think that's well spotted. I think that... Oh, yes, it does actually. I think what it's referring to is there is an increasing use of single-use plastics, and we want to stop that. We want to reverse it. So it's not saying we are going to... Does that make sense? Right. Yeah, okay. Well, I hope that's clarified that. Yeah. Anything else? Right. Okay. So we've covered the minutes. So next item 2, interests. Have any councillors got any interests, or any of our courties got any interests that they wish to declare? No. Okay. Thank you. Item 3, admission of the public. This is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting, so people are welcome to come in. I suppose, Andrew, at the moment, you are strictly speaking a member of the public who's joining us for today, and obviously there may be people externally who are watching the webcast version of this meeting. Right, so that takes us on then to item 4, which is the main issue really that we're looking at today, which is Kirklees economic strategy. So already done some brief introductions. I don't know if you want to introduce yourselves and say a little bit more about your specific roles as officers within the council. I think it's always interesting to know exactly what you do. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Alan Seasman. I have the job title of I'm the lead for placing in with investment, and so what falls under that is some elements of strategy, including the input into the Kirklees economic strategy. Also look across what we're doing with North Kirklees growth zone and inward investment and development aspects of housing strategy.
My name's Kate McNicholas. I'm Strategy and Policy Service Manager in Corporate Strategy and Public Health, so sitting within the centre of the organisation and with oversight for our overarching set of strategies.
So you've just got a short presentation, you've got copies of the slides. Once we've finished with the presentation, then we're going to conduct the discussion around the 3 main sort of themes that we've got. Yeah. Okay. So over to you.
Thank you. There is just a very brief presentation, just to give you some context and background for this piece of work. The original economic strategy was written in 2014 and it runs until 2020. It's quite timely now to look at what might need to change within it and refresh it to bring it up to date, given that there's been some fairly significant changes in terms of what's happened to the economy over that period of time. Just to make sure that where we're going with our direction of travel is still right, or what needs to change is the main thrust of it. So if you just as a reminder to look at what was in the original strategy from 2014 to 2020, there's the original vision, which was for Kirklees to be recognised as the best place to do business in the north of England, and one where people prosper and flourish in all our communities. And then there was underneath that a series of things that were the beginnings of priorities to translate into action. If you just go through that, so it's about resilience and competitiveness, which I'm sure you're familiar with in terms of the work that we've done on economic resilience. That, it's about people's employment prospects, skills, jobs, income, and it's about quality of life and place. So on the next slide, it's not very clear, is it, that? Is that translated into 5 priorities, and what you can see in each of those boxes from along the bottom and up the right are what those priorities were. And just as a reminder, both to myself and to you, he says, scrolling around for the piece of paper, is that those priorities were around precision engineering and innovative manufacturing, innovative and enterprising businesses, workforce skills and employment, infrastructure and quality places. So that's what each of those things there, and what that diagram tried to show was how each of those priorities built up together into a better quality of life in the district. So, We've already started to look at a refresh of the KES, and the first thing that we did with that was to do a bit of a scoping review to say, well, given the many changes that might have happened, what are the things in the KES that might need to be looked at? And the first of those things is that, and perhaps surprisingly, it says raise the level of ambition. I mean, I think the overall vision for the KES, you'd say, was pretty ambitious to start with. I think this is about raise the ambition in terms of what we're going to do in delivery. That we make partnerships and the strategy stronger and more effective, that we need to move the KES into being one that's owned by a wider audience beyond the council, and that the KES has helpful foundations, but also as an opportunity for update and sharper prioritisation. I think what that means is that we have tried to do a lot with the original KES, and we need to focus in on some of the key things now. We need to stay alert and be flexible to respond to a constantly changing national and city region context and themes, not least of which is our changing relationship with Europe, or evolving issues around inclusive growth and industrial strategies. And we need to maintain and keep in sight the links to our joint health and wellbeing strategy. I'll make this point again, that the KES, along with the joint health and wellbeing strategy, are the Council's two main priorities, with the main strategies, with the local plan being the spatial description of what we're trying to achieve. And that also what we need to do is we need to improve the management and monitoring of the KES more systematically, more proactively, so we can measure what we've been doing better. So for the next steps of the KES refresh, what we need to do now is to develop outline ideas for the direction of the strategy, identify shared priorities and relationships with other strategic council documents, which I've mentioned. We need to take a look across at what's changed in that world as well. Build upon a strong base of evidence analysis, including on key themes, and this might be one way in which the KES changes moving forward. There might be some more key themes that emerge, particularly perhaps around an evolving story on productivity. Establish and manage relationships with external partners, including business partners, to ensure wider ownership of the development and delivery of the new KES. This is the point I said about taking the ownership of the KES beyond the council into our wider partnership areas. And we will produce a consultation roadmap to conduct consultation with those key partners and continue to brief elected members, relevant boards and committees, and to produce a draft, including a final draft of the revised KES, within quite a tight timetable. So that's quite a rush-through summary of what you should have seen in the report. And so, over to you.
So, as we go through this, there's quite a lot there. If we can try and stick with those three phases. So to begin by looking at the scoping review, particularly looking at what's come out of looking at how successful the plan has been today, then looking at the next steps, and then how the strategy links are going to work. Yeah. So, first question, Councillor Hughes.
I think it's quite good that we've used external consultants to have a look at it on an independent basis. How were those consultants chosen? That's my number one question. And it says you've worked with members and officers of Kirklees Council. Which members did you work with and which officers within Kirklees?
The consultants working on this, the consultants that we used in production of the original strategy, because they've best understood where we got to in the first instance. In terms of members, what we're talking about there is consultation with portfolio holders on the process moving forward. The next stage of the work on the KES will require much closer consultation with members.
When you say portfolio holders, which ones in particular did you work with? Because this crosses, work across the council.
It's mainly been just briefings to Councillor McBride at the minute. I think the next stage is where we get into consultation. In the scoping review, what we've done is we've just taken a very quick look at what are the major changes, what we've delivered so far, and how that might influence how the cares may need to change.
So the scoping review in some respects can be seen as the kind of the backwards looking bit, and the stage that we're at now, having received that scoping review report that's in your pack, is to look at the forwards looking bit. So what should be our key priorities moving forward from an economic perspective.
Has anybody got any further comments about the process? Andrew.
That one. Oh, sorry. I'll learn. Just thinking about the looking back, just trying to be clear, what lessons have you learned looking back about what wasn't working, what didn't work in the strategy so far? I'm interested to hear explicitly what didn't work out so we can make sure it doesn't happen again.
I think it's less about what hasn't worked and more to do with what haven't we had the capacity to do. So there's bits that we've done since the strategy happened which have gone really quite well. So there's work around North Kirklees growth zone and the focus of transforming Dewsbury, where work that we've done has gone really quite well and developed quite well. I think looking back, when we had a very long list of things to try and do to deliver the cares, there are things that haven't happened, not because things have gone wrong, but just because we haven't had the resources and capacity to actually do them. I think that is where the point about sharper prioritisation is needed.
Do you wish to follow that up, Andrew?
Sorry, just to press the point, I'm trying to understand, you're being more ambitious looking forward. You haven't had capacity to do stuff in the backward-looking plan. I mean, I think it's very important we understand how we're going to leverage more capacity or more capability into this somehow or other. Collaboration with wider partners is key going forward. And again, that feels like it needs a lot more energy in the thinking. Because at the moment it feels a bit nominal. You know, you're talking about consultation rather than collaboration. And if the council hasn't got the capacity, we've got to find that from somewhere else. And it's energising that capacity, which requires it to be involved very early on. Otherwise, people don't want to implement your plan. They want to implement their plan.
So, I mean, I think in part you've answered your own question in terms of one of the things that limited our capacity in delivery of the 2014 cares was around that wider buy-in, wider ownership, and wider set of inputs. And it's certainly something that we're highly conscious of as we move into this next phase. In terms of how we make that collaboration and a wider set of resources more effective, I think that there's probably at least two scales to be thinking about. So there's collaboration and engagement within the district, and then there's also connections through into our wider city region set of resources. And certainly on the latter, we've been making good progress. So within the team that's helping work on this, we have support, practical day-to-day support from West Yorkshire Combined Authority in helping us think through how to approach this and make the connections through then into the significant resources that are directed at that spatial scale, so that we've certainly got some strong links there. The next phase that slide outlines is, so we are really talking to you at the starting point of these next steps. So in terms of how we start to move into the forward-facing bit rather than the backward-facing bit, we are now setting up. So how do we talk to people? And yes, you're right, we're calling that consultation, but by that we don't just mean talking to people and getting a few ideas. We're really clear that maybe consultation is the wrong phrase. So how we get buy-in and a clear sense of delivery and ownership by different partners is very much on our agenda for this next phase.
Thank you, Richard.
Got there. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just, I just wanted to have a look at, you know, an issue you've just mentioned, because on page 13 of the document, in the table, the fourth box down on the left, you flagged up that there's establish and manage a relationship with external partners, including I'm incompetent at this. But anyway, sorry. Basically, business partners to ensure wider ownership of the development and delivery of the new KES. So that's obviously quite a significant kind of quality. And turning to page 16, we have the timetable, okay, and I just actually had a number of questions I wanted to ask regarding this. I mean, first of all, as we can see, if you look at we're on stage 2 now, obviously, and point 5, where it says establish and manage the emerging economic partnership to ensure they take ownership of the development and delivery of the new KES. So, I mean, economic partnership is actually in capital letters. Is this an entity? Is it an organisation? Is it a committee? Is it has it actually been, you know, has it been established in that sense? Or that's my first question, really.
So, it's a very useful point that you flag. The commitment is to developing an economic partnership with capital letters that would be one of the thematic strategic partnerships within our sort of formal partnership working, so as part of that sort of local strategic partnership suite of, or family of partnerships. Some of that work has gone less quickly than we'd originally anticipated back in the spring and summer. So does it exist at the moment? The answer is no. But we're clear that in terms of how we engage with business and other key stakeholders, and how such an arena should then own a strategy, that's still a direction that we're trying to achieve. It is moving slower than we'd originally anticipated, but it is the sort of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about ownership and collaboration, so that there would be a partnership around it. But you're entirely right to spot that we said that we'd have that done by August, and it's the 5th of September now, and so no, that isn't quite yet in place. Yeah,
can I do a follow-up on that? Yeah, because I mean, I'm not. It's a really ambitious programme, and it needs to be. So I'm not being overly critical here. But what I'm just a bit concerned about, and maybe you can set those concerns to rest. I mean, looking at point 6, which is due by the end of October. You know, the idea is obviously that you'll have completed the consultation process, I assume, from that. So really, it's just a concern. I mean, clearly, I just wondered, you know, is there a danger, really, that consultation, because of such a short time span, may not be, you know, satisfactory, really, or as full as we might like it to be? And a kind of subsidiary question to that as well. I mean, you've mentioned business as consultees. What other parts of the community and the economy are you thinking of consulting? I mean, trade unions. I mean, obviously there's a vast third sector. It's a major part of the economy in Kirklees. And also it might be, I know it's kind of going away from the cash nexus here, but there's also a large voluntary sector, which in one sense is economic, isn't it? So I don't know. Those are the two questions. Yeah. So is it too? It's a concern. Is this actually kind of doable in terms of the time? And secondly, who exactly are we proposing to consult?
So to answer your question, is that this is ambitious. It is a refresh, not a completely new strategy. So it's not perhaps quite as ambitious than if we were just starting completely from a blank page. And it's not that we are trying to completely rewrite the KES. It is a refresh. So we are assuming that some things are stable and stay the same. That's the first point. The second point is, yes, we will want to consult with businesses. Will we consult with all businesses in this timescale? Probably not. But we will be talking to business. We will be talking to third sector and third sector reps. Will that be all of them? Probably not. You know, and we will also be talking to people involved in infrastructure provision and try to theme it in that way. And we've been talking about this today in terms of the actual mechanism of how it might be achieved, because we are trying to find the best way of doing it. And we may then also need to do a further, more open consultation with as many people as we can to say, this is what we think is happening. Does that seem sensible or not? But you're quite right that doing that in the timescale that's been set is challenging.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take this opportunity, since we're talking about working with partnerships and businesses, to give an example, but it's also applicable to the broader strategy. The example I will give is the BID, the Huddersfield Town Centre BID, which appears to be disputed, but that is an example of the way it seems to be looking to work with business partners. And looking at it, I do have some worries. For example, is it one business, one vote, or do mega businesses get mega votes? What happens to people who refuse NICs or non-payers? If they won't participate, are they run out of town? So in other words, are these partnerships voluntary or mandatory? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think that is an example of a partnership, and also an example of where there are initiatives going on independently, well, semi-independently of what's happening in the council. We will come back to that, I think, in detail, because we are looking at town centres. So I don't think we need to look at this particular initiative. I think it's more a matter of the general principle of how we work with other initiatives and groups that are operating within Kirklees.
What I would say is that things like BID, which is about the delivery of something within it, is like, what we need to be concerned about with the KES is that they are doing things that fits with the general direction of the KES. What the KES can't be, it can't be an action plan for every initiative that we've got. It can only set that context. And if that context says that doing things in Huddersfield Town Centre is important, then that's right. I'd be more worried if the KES said that and this is hypothetical, that Huddersfield Town Centre wasn't important and that activity was happening on and was using resource and it wasn't something we should be doing, then it wouldn't fit with the strategy.
When you're talking to businesses, which is obviously something important, what in practice are you actually doing? I mean, are you offering them any facilities, or are you getting information? I mean, what is the exchange about? I mean, I was in business for nearly 40 years, making equipment stuff. And if we wanted to make something, we would assess our resources, see whether we could do it, make something and sell it. And we were not interested in what the council thought about it or was going to do about it. All we were interested in the council was that they should reduce their rates, which they never did, of course. Now, there was no other interaction, and I don't know that the council could have been any help to me in what I was trying to do. So what is it you're actually doing for or with businesses in practice?
I think that cuts to the point of what we're trying to talk about with the KES in terms of it not being a council document. What we're interested in talking to businesses about is what they can bring to making the Kirklees a better place to live. What is it they are doing in terms of training their workforce or not being able to train their workforce? What is it that they're doing in terms of being able to access help from the university in terms of innovation, or what they are needing in terms of new sites, premises or other infrastructure improvement that the council can control?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. On the evidence base, in the scoping exercise, Obviously, there's a summary about the fact that on many indicators there's been some positive outcomes for Kirklees, but they do pick up some issues around skills, and it says that we're often not keeping pace with the national average or neighbouring areas, and it does talk about a low value economy and issues with low wages. One of the things I'm interested in, and Brexit is obviously mentioned in the document too, and things have changed since you started the document. So I think one of the interesting things will be around your evidence base. So what we'll be doing, how are we looking at Brexit and the impact on Kirklees, and how we're looking at impacts of automation. That's becoming particularly more of an issue for areas that have a high service sector, and how are we using evidence to try and improve issues around skills and low wage levels as well?
So the original, well, the initial scoping review kind of pulls out some highlights of some of the things that we know from some of the sort of high level data. But as part of the next phase of work, we'll be producing a more detailed evidence pack. I had a conversation about it with colleagues at West Yorkshire Combined Authority who are going to do the work for us yesterday, and certainly we were talking about so what is the story around Brexit? What does that really mean for Kirklees? Absolutely, in terms of the latest industrial revolution, what does it mean in terms of automation? But also looking at how we can pull together some analysis and intelligence that looks at the differences within the district as well, so not just district level data, but looking at what do the economies of Kirklees look like rather than just the single economy at a district level. We're expecting to theme that analysis around a set of key concerns, which would include things like inclusive growth, or inclusive economy, and within that we'd certainly be looking at wage levels and skills, and both the long-term trends and the stark messages that some of the data tells us as part of that, and then also what's changed since 2014, since we produced the original strategy. There's some work that we will be doing as part of that evidence pack around productivity as well, and one of our kind of key concerns is that we make sure that inclusive economy and that productivity stories come together, so that it's looking at the two sides of the same coin rather than sort of looking at, so what does it mean for people and what does it mean in terms of economic growth. We see those two things as utterly integrated in our new approach, and I think, as Alan mentioned right at the beginning, that's probably one of the things that's shifted since the 2014 approach, that sense of the importance of an inclusive economy to Kirklees. So that evidence base we'd be looking to have ready by the end of this month. That's where we're going to. Yeah, so that's where we're going to with that.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Firstly, I think, is it credible for all that to be ready by the end of the month? Is that a bit ambitious? And just one more thing on the some of the issues that have been. I think it's great that you're saying that we're going to be looking at much detail level at Kirklees, because you're right. Different areas have different statistics, different varying stats on employment, on income. I mean, I was just looking at some of the ward profiles before I came to the meeting. So I'm obviously a councillor in Ashbrow. So if we look at some of the indices around multiple deprivation, absolutely huge in Ashbrow compared to the Kirklees average, never mind the national average on that. So making sure that we look at those distinct things are going to be really, really important. And just today there's been a report out by IPPR about economic justice, and I think that sort of stuff's really important. So it's focusing on low wage growth, automation, and the impact of persistent inequality. And I would really like to see inequality as a really high-level, ambition for us. Not that we want more inequality, but that we're really looking at trying to tackle the gap in our borough to make sure that we don't have such a big varying degree of, skills, education, employment.
Yeah, I'm just going to say a little bit before I bring you in, Councillor McTry. Yeah, I think you're raising some really important points there, that in terms of looking at what the key issues are. There's some very positive things in Kirklees, but there are some quite deep underlying problems. I think one of the phrases that struck me was that it says in the report that we're in danger of becoming a lower value economy with lower value sectors and jobs. But I don't think that's something that will affect the whole economy, but it certainly will affect certain parts of the economy. And I think tackling those things are essential. I think with the work that the kind of complementary work that's going on alongside the main strategy, the inclusive growth strategy, that is about those kind of things. And I think it will be interesting to know how we're going to begin to tackle some of those problems, which will make a massive difference for everybody if we can make a difference and move them on.
And if I could sort of outline our thinking, so there's a really complementary piece of work that we see as kind of being utterly connected into the economic strategy development around social value and community wealth building. And a report on that will come to you at the next of your committee meetings, and both in practical terms, in terms of how we develop that approach and the CARES as one, and then the outputs from that, we see those as being, it's not a coincidence that those are being developed at the same time. I would say that certainly our officer recommendation at this point is that we have a single economic strategy, and that we're not suggesting that we have a separate inclusive growth strategy, that our economic strategy should deliver us inclusive growth and isn't seen as a separate thing. That's not to say that there's not focused work on the inclusive growth agenda, but we don't see a separate strategy as an output from it. Can I just come back to your deliverability question as well on the evidence base? So if we were starting yesterday when I had the conversation with the analysis unit in West Yorkshire Combined Authority, I probably would be worried. However, there's been two streams of work that have been taking place over the summer. One stream locally, with our intelligence team here in Kirklees, looking at key success measures around the sustainable economy agenda, so our shared outcome that this sits under. And then within West Yorkshire Combined Authority, they've done a whole suite of analysis already, which they've kind of almost have sort of set up for us to, in terms of the data. So the conversation yesterday was about how we interrogate that rather than that they have to kind of start from scratch. So I'm quite confident that we'll have a strong evidence base by the end of the month. That's not to say that there won't be key areas where the data is limited that we want to interrogate further, or we want to talk to businesses about to get that lived experience rather than just what the numbers tell us. But certainly I think as a strong base will be there.
Sorry, I got there. Right, okay, yeah, just wanted to build on, the points around evidence, because, and kind of link it, because another aim of quite rightly, of the document is to actually is to show the connections between the KES as a strategy and other strategies that the Council has adopted, around other aspects of work, health, whatever, well-being. Obviously, in evidential terms, that's going to be quite a tough gig, really, because you're looking at a very wide spectrum of, statistics and data, and to actually link them together. So I suppose what I'm trying to ask, really, is obviously, a holistic approach is built into this process, rightly, is built into the process. Really, it's just a plea, really, because if it's going to be real, if we're going to really connect the economic strategy with the other kind of policies and strategies of the Council, then clearly the different evidence bases actually have to mesh together as far as possible. And really, so it's just now, it's obviously, it's a big job. I mean, I know, from research myself, but if that's, I don't know, have you any thoughts how you're actually going to do that? So, but they could be through that. That's how we can make meaningful, I presume, develop meaningful policies and recommendations. So that's it, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important important point to hold. I mean, one of the reasons why we're a bit of a double act today is to hold together the economic development agenda with that wider strategic framework. So that's why we're working together on this and the kind of resources we're bringing from the organisation. As I mentioned, so the intelligence team within Kirklees Council are doing a piece of work at the moment that we're drawing from for the sustainable economy sort of set of success measures, but that is part of a suite of work that they're doing across our 7 shared outcomes, looking at what the intelligence tells us and how do we know whether we're being effective in our how do we know whether we're making a difference, whether we're changing, so that it does sit quite neatly in a wider piece of corporate work that's fallen out of the work that was done, that went to full council in July around the corporate plans and around the seven outcomes within that. So it does mesh in, but you're right, it also needs to. We need to make that happen.
Can I ask a question about innovation and entrepreneurship? In the document, you mentioned the University of Huddersfield as a key innovation hub or centre. 2 questions really. What's the engagement process with the university about that, and how they link into this work? Because they ought to be a key collaborator. And secondly, have you got any either source and destination analysis of our graduates? Because lots of university cities thrive on being able to retain their sort of intellectual capital that comes into the locality from outside. I just wondered how well Huddersfield did in that, and whether that might be a quite a focused agenda to address in terms of trying to retain more intellectual capacity in the locality.
Again, I think you're absolutely right. The university are a key partner. We will be talking to them as a centre for innovation. You know, they are the centre. We've got 3 MBIC there. There is the National Physical Laboratory Northern Outpost there, which is a fantastic resource for manufacturing industries in terms of, or all industries, in terms of just being able to measure things and the science of measuring things. You know, the Rail Institute Centre at the university, there's fantastic expertise there. I think it's more about fostering a conversation between the university and business, about business accessing that rather than the council. You know, there's a resource there to enable businesses to innovate, and then finding out what the council's role is in helping that innovation happen. But absolutely, it's not just the university. I'd stretch that across to other further education institutions, the National Processing Engineering Centre that the college have on St Andrews Road is absolutely critical and links the businesses there on the skills agenda and innovation around that. I think that's absolutely fundamental, and they are people we will be talking to. When it comes to the graduates or people of destination data, I don't have precise figures on it. Things I've seen in the past is we don't retain as many graduates as we should, and that's something that I think we'd want to address. What I would say is that when we produced the KES in 2014, it was the first time in my experience in working in this world, which is too long in many ways, it was the first time we'd addressed housing as being part of that infrastructure for growth and the need for the housing to be seen as infrastructure and key to the economy. And what we do in terms of a housing offer to keep and retain graduates, I think is absolutely critical to that moving forward.
Just changing the, looking at another aspect of it. So on page 14.23.2, so there's just the second bullet point under there. So I'll just let everyone get their bits of paper ready. Right, really welcome this point, a joint approach between the revised KES and work on local wealth building with CLARES and so on consultation, including the possibility for joint workshop sessions with partners. Now, I mean, as we know, local wealth building kind of operates on two broad levels, which is, you know, kind of strategic level in terms of procurement and partnerships and so on. And but also it kind of operates on much more kind of bottom-up community level, you know, where you have local businesses and mutuals, co-ops, etc., which, you know, obviously add high value to on a local level. So I suppose, I mean, obviously it's great it's in here, and because it's I assume this is going to be like a really big part of, you know, what the council's going to be doing moving forward, and which is fantastic. But really, I suppose the question I'm asking is, would there be more scope for building this into in a more systematic way into the actual document itself? I mean, for example, if you turn to page 29, we have our graphic here, and you know, when you look at all these boxes, it's actually, you know, that kind of community wealth building approach applies to every single one, really, in one way or another, some more than others. So yeah, I just wondered what your thoughts were about how you're going to kind of really make this almost at the centre, you know, of it, because this is the big innovative change, isn't it, possibly since this has been published.
Yeah. You're going to respond to Councillor Murphy. I think that comes back to what's the purpose of this? What are the objectives? Coming back to this idea that it's about being ambitious, being clear about those ambitions. So it is our key ambition about this inclusive growth, which is trying to raise everyone up within the district. And if so, I think that's got to be in the centre of things.
Absolutely. We, you know, from our officer perspective, we couldn't agree more that we see the inclusive growth agenda. I think sometimes we use these terms interchangeably, and sometimes that's a bit lazy, but inclusive growth, inclusive economy and community wealth building, and that suite of concerns, which is about creating an economy that people can contribute to, can benefit from, and also is locally resilient as well, is something that we see as a key shift over the last 4 years, a key political steer in terms of the Cabinet's expectations in terms of this work, and something that we really are committed to integrating those two aspects into a coherent approach. So that your point about it systematically running through the document, not just being about some joint work as we develop two pieces of outputs, is absolutely where we're going with this. I think the only thing that I would add is that we see that agenda as being integral to our thinking around raising productivity as well. So it's not just about narrowing the gap because that's socially worthy. It's about narrowing the gap and engaging, creating a more resilient and inclusive economy, because that will stand a better chance of being a growing economy as well. So we see that connection as being critical.
Going back to page 14 of 2.32, and it said that you are taking a number of steps already. One is a joint approach between the revised CARES and the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLARES, that we've had at this panel before when we've looked at social value, haven't we? Yeah. I just wondered how much work you've been doing with them, and whether as a panel we ought to invite them back and just see what they think about what's happening at the moment. And also you mentioned Councillor Pandor at the LEP partnership, whether or not we ought to invite Councillor Pandor as well, and just to find out what work's been going on there.
Right, both excellent points, I think. I think it would be good if it's possible to get someone from CLES to come into the next session to talk to us directly about the work they've been undertaking. Councillor Hughes and I were both members of the policy committee going back 3 municipal years ago, and the presentation that they made to us was very interesting, really, wasn't it? In terms of Councillor Pandor, unfortunately, he was invited to this meeting, and he's actually on council business, and we've invited him to the next meeting, and similar story, unfortunately. But I am going to make sure that I meet with him as lead member and talk the issues through with him. And I am particularly interested in the group that's been set up to push forward the inclusive growth strategy, because I think Councillor Pandor sees that as a kind of key project. He's working on it, as you say, at a regional level within Wicker. And I would like to know more about how that group is going to be set up and how it's going to work. I think councillors generally would be interested in that, and the wider public, I think, as well would be interested to know how that's going to work. So I think those are both really good points. A kind of general thing, I think, is that one thing I welcome within the documents that we've looked at is there's a very ambitious approach in terms of trying to move from just really talking to people about the things that we're doing, consulting with them, and moving towards collaboration with people. Do you think that is something that is going to be achievable within the timescale, and how do you think we're going to get that to work? What kind of forms of collaboration are we going to see?
I think we need to get the direction right and to get agreement that what we're doing is the right thing to do for everybody. And on the basis of that, you would hope that you would then identify willing partners who want to share in trying to achieve that with us. Whether we'll do that or not, I think, well, the consultation process will begin to tell us whether there are people out there who want to join in with us or not.
And it is worth saying that we know that there are. So the work that we've done around social value and community wealth building already has involved some really positive conversations with partners across the district, really up for doing things differently and doing tangible things rather than just talking as well. You raised a point about, I forget who raised it, about university engagement previously, and there's some really strong engagement from the university in some of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority work, where they're really committed. There's a Huddersfield University rep on the Inclusive Growth and Public Policy Committee that Councillor Pandor chairs. They're really committed to that agenda. So we know that there is will and appetite and commitment to harness. I think the challenge that you're articulating is how we tip that into action locally within the timescales that we've got. But certainly there is, again, it's that point of there's plenty to build on. It's not a complete cold start.
If I could just ask a supplementary question to that, and then I'll bring you in. In terms of this economic partnership, do you see that as mainly being a sort of central board, or do you see there being different groups looking at different aspects of the economy, working on particular challenges?
I don't think we know yet. I think that's a work in progress, and there's some other work being commissioned to be through Thinking Places, which will begin to give us a way in which that might work. I think what we do know is that some past attempts at trying to get a grouping like that perhaps hasn't given us what we want, and we need to look at it more closely.
Thank you. Just want to sort of wind back to your answer to the question about collaboration. I was very concerned in the way you described that, because it sounded like you were going to develop a strategy and then you were going to, through consultation, then you're going to invite people who wanted to join in and help you deliver it. Well, now, that does not, and that's what you said, almost I'm sort of playing back the words to you. I think we just need to work really hard on what collaboration means, and it's not consultation with a big C. It's something quite different, and it involves people giving up ownership and sharing ownership. So it's a very different philosophy. I'm not at all convinced what I'm hearing you say really embraces that. So I think I'm not trying to be rude, it's my first meeting, but I think you really need to think hard about how you engage people in order that they will collaborate with you rather than respond to a consultation. And this feels ever so much like many council conversations I've been through before, which are, you know, at the end of the process, you ask some people, often the great and the good, to come and drink some coffee with you and to nod politely. And then you wonder why, in a year's time, you've been too ambitious. Because actually the consultees have melted away like snow on a dike in the first sign of sun. Now, collaboration is a much deeper, longer-term, integrating force than that, and you know it is, but I don't see a process which generates it. That's my concern. So my challenge to you will be, you need a process which generates genuine collaboration. Yeah. You may have one, but I haven't heard you describe it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and if I could add to that, one of my concerns is that I think you need collaboration at the very, very early stage where you're thinking about what the ambition is. So as part of the review of how things are going, we should be thinking about, have we had the right goals in sight? And if not, what do people feel about them? And the wider community, I think, should be involved in setting out what it is that we're trying to achieve, not just the process.
I'll say again that one of the things with this is a refresh of the strategy. The strategy was endorsed by full council back in 2014, and in terms of consultation, we're not starting again with a blank sheet of paper. So that's the first thing to remember. In terms of collaboration, what we've done through the scoping review is to look at, well, what's happened there with our partners, and I think it's critical that where the council's been and where the council used to be is the council has moved to a world where the council is more of an enabler than a doer, and that isn't as well understood perhaps with all our partners as that in all of these things people often look to the council to do, and what we're looking for through this process is to say we cannot do all of this on our own. So in terms of collaboration, it's not please agree with us, now go away because we will do it. We cannot do this on our own. We cannot do all of it. We need businesses to invest in workforce skills. We need businesses to innovate. We can't do that for them. But we can identify it as an issue and ask them to agree that this is what needs to be a priority.
Just going back on collaboration, I'm the co-chair of the Tri-Service Board, Collaboration Board, and it is very, very difficult to do collaboration. But you're talking about doing a scoping review. The council is doing a scoping review. You should be doing the scoping review with the partners and scoping out with your partners what they might be able to collaborate with you on, first of all. Have you got any strands of collaboration at all? Is there anything?
So the scoping review is the name that we gave to the first phase of this work, which looked.
We want to collaborate, which is very easy to say, we want to collaborate. But collaborate on what? What can your partners collaborate with you on?
Yeah, I think just to give an example of how something like this could work, it's really following on some of the work we did on transport and railways last year. A group's been set up through, which is linking into the skills strategy, to look at working with the businesses who are going to be delivering things like the Transpennine upgrade, but also the other longer-term projects, looking at what it is that they need in terms of skills. And we're then working with the university, the colleges, the schools, but also working with people like the LEP, the New Careers Hub, the Career Service and things like that, to look at how we can work together collaboratively to push something forward that is really going to make a difference. And I would hope that kind of model is the kind of thing that could make a difference, really. I think it's something like the IT sector as well. We could be looking at something like this, probably and hopefully linking into some of the other big issues like productivity, about moving towards becoming a higher value type economy and higher skills economy. That was what was behind my earlier question about whether this is just going to be like one central body, or are we really going to have effective working groups working in particular sectors that we identify where we need to move things forward. Yeah, so that...
I mean, just a couple of points really. So the piece of work that we've done so far looked at how life has changed since the KES was originally written 4 years ago. And we commissioned that piece of work so that we had a sense of what that change is and a sense of some key topics to start a conversation with partners. But that's not the only thing that's going on. That's kind of one key input into our work, but that doesn't summarise all that we've done by any means. So, as I said before, the social value piece of work that we've done has involved sitting down with partners and talking about what it is that we could collaborate on together. The work that's going on around the skills agenda, which absolutely feeds into this, and you've got at your next meeting, is about sitting down with the university and the colleges and talking about, so what is our common agenda and how do we best prioritise and pursue it. So there is absolutely a challenge that you've identified in terms of how we make this meaningful in the timescales that we're working to, and we're acutely aware of that. But as Alan said, we fully know that this is about enabling change, not directing change, and that means working with rather than doing to. We kind of do get that agenda, and perhaps it's because of the point in time that we're at in the conversation that we're having today, having done one sort of slant in and setting out the next phase of work, it feels that it's less collaborative than we intend it to be. But that is certainly our commitment.
I'll just add to that is that, I mean, we take the point about this, but I wouldn't see the KES in isolation. The KES is, with the JAWS and the local plan, things that the council are trying to do in terms of setting out a framework for the future of the district. We have done loads of work in the local plan and got to a point where the local plan is on the verge of being adopted, which will set that framework to enable people to do stuff. And we need to say to them, well, come on, let's get on now, let's deliver something. But it's not something that we're not going back to first principles, and we're not looking to consult to say, what do you think the direction of the district should be? This is about taking the next step on delivering for people.
I think one of our key duties through the year has got to be to continue to return to whether or not these things are integrating properly and the degree to which we are achieving the collaboration. Except I welcome the fact that the importance of this has been recognised. I think it is a step forward. And we've got to make sure that we maintain the progress, the momentum going forward with this. Yeah. Councillor Rubel.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to raise a point about the... Oh gosh, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. I've written so many things down here. Let's just have a quick look. Right, just initially, I know it's a refresh and you've mentioned that a fair few times and stuff. You've obviously got an original document that you're working off, but the scope and exercise does mention about ensuring that we've got radical ideas as well, and particularly it focuses on looking at Huddersfield with a radical vision, the town centre there, and also in terms of, I think it might have been the green agenda, and the transport opportunities as well, and making sure we do look at it ambitiously and radically as well. So, I do think that's really, really important. I think the inclusive growth stuff absolutely fits into that. That's going to be really crucial going forward. Just on one of the other points, obviously it talks about making sure the document's much sharper and much more focused in and on the key priorities. And I think some of that might be to do with perhaps also some of the language we're using on some of this stuff. So I think the headline, let me just try and get the right document, sorry. So it says, our vision is for Kirklees to be recognised as the best place to do business in the north of England and one where people prosper and flourish in all of our communities. Now, I know we always, for a vision statement, it can be quite vague and broad, but sometimes, some of this language doesn't really make sense to, the public and ourselves. So perhaps having a look at the language we use, and particularly I think on your 5 sort of priorities as well. Again, I am sometimes finding the language quite dense. So, something that we can do that is quite clear and makes sense to people. And the other thing just quickly was about the collaboration also between the different strategies. So it does mention, the scope and exercise mention it's a good idea that you're looking at it jointly with the health and wellbeing strategy. Absolutely, really, really important. But there's perhaps been some issues when you've tried to implement that, which, again, can happen, but that's going to be really, really crucial going forward, isn't it? I was just looking at the sectors within Kirklees as well, and one of the biggest employment sectors is wholesale, retail, including the repair of motor vehicles. So 21% of the different employment sectors is made up of that, and again, that's quite a precarious sector at the moment, particularly around automation as well. So, issues around sort of employment security and wage security are going to be key here, aren't they? And how we link that in actually with health and well-being is going to be crucial, particularly around sort of mental health as well. So, and the retraining of adults, I think that was picked up. I'm sorry, I'm bringing up loads of different things here, aren't I? But I'm sure that's something that you're going to be thinking about, particularly about the retraining of adults, given that that sector is so precarious and quite a big chunk of our employment at the moment in Kirklees.
So just really briefly to pick up a couple of points from that. You started by talking about that sort of the language being sharper but also more accessible, and some of the early conversations we've had about making sure that we can be clear about how this makes a difference to people. The key indicator that we think will resonate with people is disposable household income. How does Kirklees' economic strategy raise disposable household income? And if that's something that's tangible, not just to businesses, but to our residents, and making sure that we're focused on that. And the other point to make in terms of that connection through to health, our focus on inclusive growth and inclusive economy really puts some of that centre stage, and we're really conscious of making sure that those links work, and our colleagues in public health are really committed to that as well. So yeah, it's certainly something we'll follow through.
Just building on what Harpreet said as well. I mean, if you turn to page 23 of the document, I think this is, in the scoping review, it makes the point about, which I think is a really good point, about the need to manage and monitor KES systematically and proactively. I just wanted to kind of link that with, because we've been discussing a bit the whole issue of collaboration, and obviously collaboration, because, as you were saying, I mean, given the resources of the council, the expectation has to be that any strategy does empower and facilitate and enable businesses and community groups, third sector and so on, to actually deliver, outcomes as far as possible, and that's absolutely sensible. But going back to points that other people in the room have made about collaboration, I mean, in a sense, it has to begin from the outset for it to really work. So I suppose what I'm trying to ask here is that if it would be put, if you're looking at our actions and priorities, in a sense, we would need to actually agree those and set those with partner organisations, I guess, from as well as being led by the council. Does that make sense? Yeah. So really, I'm just asking how, obviously, I know. Sorry, all of us are sounding a bit like a stuck record, but it's this is a big job. Obviously, it is. I mean, we've got. In order to kind of deliver that, so that the priorities and actions are agreed with potential partners, how do you kind of envisage building that into the consultation process. Does that make sense as a question?
It does, but
Okay.
I'm not sure what more we can add to what we've
Okay,
done
all
already.
right.
I mean, certainly, I mean, it's really heartening to hear the emphasis on collaboration, and we really do take your point, and we really do get it as well. But I'm not sure what can add beyond what we've already said.
I think something you were sort of touching on there, I was going to ask a question about. I think with strategies within the council, it's great to have them. You need to do the thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve. But I think actually putting that into action and monitoring it is also really, really important. And I think there is the implication within the review that perhaps that's not happened quite as much as it should have done up to now. Probably a lot of it's due to having the resource to be able to do that. But I just wondered what the plan was, or you might be at a very early stage with this, to actually put a really robust but flexible monitoring process in there so that you can check that you're actually achieving the things that you want to achieve as part of this strategy. It talks about, I think in the diagram, it talks about things being smart, sort of using smart targets and things. Do you think that is something that we can improve on?
I think it certainly is, and it's part of a piece of work that's going on corporately across all of our outcomes as well. So the corporate plan sets out 2 key indicators for measuring the success of the sustainable economy outcome. One of those is disposable household income, as I mentioned, and then the other is GBA, so that measure of productivity. But what the intelligence team are doing currently within corporate strategy and public health is looking at, so what are the additional indicators that will help us understand what progress we're making in terms of building a sustainable economy, and that work will mesh into this. So yes, there is capacity to do that.
Okay, I think it's been quite a lengthy, fairly exhaustive question session. Are there any further points? Mark, have you got a further question?
We started off in the beginning with the object, raise the level of ambition. This is 4 years ago. It's difficult to sort of pin down in your mind exactly what that is. Is it the level of ambition of the actual strategy, or of the council, or the people who are trying to implement it, or what? What I'd really like to ask you is what you feel about it. Whether you feel over these 4 years that the strategy has actually had any significant and useful effect on the behaviour of the council.
I think it has. I mean, I think it comes back to the answer I gave before. It's been really good in some places and less good in others. Where we've had the resources to devote and bring things together and to concentrate, the prioritisation around North Kirklees growth zone and what we're doing in Dewsbury, I think has been front and centre of coming out of the work of the KES. The emerging work that we now need to do around Huddersfield and to try and replicate that, I think that's starting to come out of what we said in the original KES. I think the delivery of the local plan, KES was a key document for getting the local plan and providing the underpinning of delivering the local plan. I think, yeah, there's some really good things that if we hadn't had the KES, we wouldn't have been able to achieve. But it hasn't achieved everything we set out to do, and it hasn't. The district isn't in the place we want it to be yet.
So you would call it a success on the whole, then, would you?
Is it a success in the whole? I think the jury's still out on that, to be quite honest. I think, have we made progress? Yes, and we haven't been wasting our time.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Kate and Alan, for coming along and presenting this. I think on the whole, our reaction is that this is very positive. I think it's really going to strengthen the initial strategy, and I think if we can achieve the linkage with the inclusive growth work, I think that will really make a big difference. And I think it's also very heartening that we're looking at closer links with the other strategies, the other pieces of work that are going to take place within the council and we're going to be looking at. So thanks very much. I think you have some excellent work. Possibly need to look at timings of things. I think you probably, to be fair to yourselves, need a little bit more time if you're going to achieve some of these really ambitious things that you're looking at. But yeah, we really wish you well in pushing forward with this work. Thank you. Thank you. Right, okay. Move on to item 5. The work programme, we had an informal discussion about this earlier, obviously, and the work programme has been approved now by the management committee. We did mention earlier that we felt it might be a good idea to bring in the digital strategy and look at that before Christmas, because we see that as an important component of the overall economic strategy. I don't know if anybody's got any further comments on our work strategy and the timings that we've got in place at the moment. Any further comments?
Looks very ambitious. There's a lot to do there.
Yeah, there is a lot to do. I think the worry is if you try and fit too much in, you can kind of skim over things a little bit. So we'll have to try and avoid that. We'll have to try and make sure, I think, that we get some concise paperwork for us to look at. And when we ask questions, I guess we're going to have to make sure that we're really on the button in terms of the things that we're asking and very precise. We're getting some useful information back. But I think it would be good to cover these things because they are of a piece, really. They do link together.
Just in terms of the, I think if we're going to kind of pull it off, and I think you're right, they are quite ambitious. We are going to have to think about a methodology in some ways about how we, I'm just thinking of, say, towns and community strand. I think unless we actually have a kind of structured approach to that, and we could actually relate it to what we've heard today, about Huddersfield Town Centre and so on, then it's going to be difficult to really get the most out of it. So,
yeah, I think that's a good point. It's perhaps my chairing skills. I was hoping that I was going to impose a bit more of a structure on the questions today, but once people started, I felt it might be a bit artificial to try and rein things in. So we'll look at that. The other thing to remember as well, which new members of the panel perhaps will not be aware of, that we don't need to conduct all the work within these formal meetings. We can do work outside of these meetings if we want to look at things in a little bit more detail. We can also do things like meet people externally. So if we want to hold meetings to meet groups, that could be the Chamber of Commerce or something like that, we can do that. We can go on visits, if we want to go and have a look at another local authority and look at what they're doing in terms of their economic strategy or digital strategy or whatever. We can do that as well. So if anybody's got any good ideas around that, I'm very open to that kind of work. The other thing I think we discussed earlier is that where work increasingly is being conducted with partners from within the community, I think it would be good to look at inviting some of those partners into these meetings, giving them an opportunity to speak and perhaps present documents for us to have a look at, so that we've got that wider linkage as well. I suppose the only problem with that is it will take even more time. But yeah. Judith, did you want to say something? Everybody's happy with that. We will continue to work on it. There's obviously been slight modifications because behind the scenes, Richard and Carol and myself are meeting with officers and trying to work out when things will be ready and what's the best way to do things. So we'll continue to do that, but we will inform you about what's happening. Right, so just the final thing, item 6, the date of the next meeting, which is the 10th of October. Can you just remind me of the time of that? Because we're switching a little bit out. 10 o'clock one, yeah. So we've got a morning start because it's the day of the council, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, and thanks very much for your participation in the meeting. Yeah, thank you.